Hello everybody, welcome back to Make It and Break It. We're back on the HyperTenere. Time to finish up this stuff. That's right, crash bars are coming, let's go. My face is cut out, hold on. That's better. What's up everybody, welcome back to Make It and Break It. My name's Andrew, and beside me is all of our stuff for our project today on our Project HyperTenere Yamaha R6. We are finally going to be fabricating our crash bars, our engine crash bars today, which means we get to bust out all the cool tools. So next to me here is my Roguefab M600. It's got the HD upgrades and stuff like that. Basically, it'll let me bend almost anything I'd want to ever bend for a car, motorcycle, or automotive project. And kind of strewn all around it are pretty much all of my bending supplies. We got our tubes that we're gonna make the crash bars out of today, hopefully, if we don't screw it up. We've got some more tubes down there for a couple different kinds of mounts. I'm not entirely certain how I'm gonna finish that up, but that's what those are for. Little WD-40 to grease up the pressure die, not the pressure die, the pressure follower. This block in the back here that holds the tube in place when you're bending it. And then a couple of our tools. A couple things I'm going to admit to. One, we've got a couple problems. The first problem is actually this tool. So this tool is a layout tool. It's essentially set up, it's set up specifically for this bender so that the distance between, there's these little notches here that are specific distance that matches the distance from the block, which is the front of the block here, to the center of the bending pulley here. So you know exactly where your bend is going to start. At least that's the idea. Unfortunately, this version of the bender is slightly different than the numbers that they gave online, and my offset here is about a 1/16 of an inch off. So this is almost useless to me. Still a cool tool, I'm just upgrading it. And checking the link down below, there should be a link to Thingiverse. If you want a couple of these, I've made them up for a 1-inch and a 2-inch, as well as some templating tooling for helping with like roll cages and stuff like that. Second problem is our actual engine bar. So this is how it would sit if the front of the motorcycle's this way. It'd come off here, come down here in front, and this is supposed to run along right in front of the radiator, comes back around and comes up into our second engine mounting point. There's a problem though, and the problem is my fault because I didn't think far enough ahead. This part down here is a bend and a straight and a bend. Unfortunately, I did not get the things I would need to use this tube bender to make this bend with this little distance between the bends. If I'd gotten this piece in the roller piece, which looks like a big wheel, so it'll spin, instead of doing what this one does, which essentially just stays straight on the piece of tube, right? So it forced in the tube, the tube will sit in here, and then get forced through the die, and forced to deform, basically by this piece. If I'd gotten a different version of this, I could probably make that bend. But as it is right now, I'd have to do some really weird things, and I'm not really actually good enough with this tube bender to do that yet. Eventually, I probably will get there, but right now, that's probably not smart for me to try. But I do want to get these built, so I adjusted the design a little bit. This is why having a CAD model is really nice. I just went in and kind of held this thing up back over here on the bike, figured out where I wanted it relative to this thing, went back into my CAD model, adjusted the model so it fits, and now instead of having two bends here, this is now one big bend, and it comes back up here more of a, you know, comes from here to about here. This bends up more like that. So it gives us roughly the same sort of protection. It's a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, and instead of, you know, 150 degrees of bend here, we get like 140 degree single bend, which will be fun because this bender and the die I have in it will do 180 degrees. I think it's even marked out to 195 for some reason. But it'll do 180 degree bend. So we'll get to test that out on these things here. Finally, one thing I have not seeing is I have all my bend links. So I pulled all of these measurements off of the computer. I could see where all of these things started and finished and our piece, and so then I can just lay them out, pull them off this, lay them out onto each one, and should make bending pretty easy. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to go over the setup here one more time, mostly for my benefit, because I need to check it again in my head before I irreparably bend one of my only 2 tubes to make these main hoops. But we've got our right side in here. So this is our right side tube. It's marked out for the right side. There are slight differences in each side. If you're curious about that, go check out whatever this flag is that's coming up right now. And the left side tube I have out here marked for demonstration here to show you kind of how I marked this out. Try to move my hands around here to not screw up the audio, but you can see here we have a series of marks. We have a mark here at the end, right out here, a secondary mark here, that's B1 or bend number 1. This is the 90 degree bend. Another circular mark here. And then another bending mark right here for bend number 2. So the idea is these are the starts of the bend, these bend marks here. And these circular marks are the clamp placement marks. So we put the clamps at these locations and that'll start the bend at the bend mark. Now, we do have some marks back over here. This is the nominal end, where I think the end point will be. This is kind of, if I were to chop it off before I put it in the bender, this is about where the end of the piece of metal would be. So, or the piece of pipe, if we were gonna chop it off into small sections. So this first bend is bend number 2, which if we go look at our little board over here, bend number 2 for the right-hand side is 142.71 degrees, so 142.5-ish. So that's what we're gonna be shooting for here. All right, here goes nothing. Now when you're resetting this, you're gonna have to, if you're building in the same plane like we are, you have to make sure it's vertical. So, easiest way I have to do that is take my finder here and bump it around until it's showing 90. That'll be pretty close. Now this is bend number 2, or bend number 1 on our chart. So this should be a 90-degree bend. Alright, so that is 90. Alright, so we bent both of our tubes, and I want to do one more thing before we go congratulate ourselves on a job well done, not screwing this up. And I do want to check fit this with our nominal-ish marks here on it against our mounts, which are here and mostly in the correct position. So we put this up here, roughly 2 inches in is where I thought this would be. And this is going to fit pretty well. Let's see if we go 2 inches in like this. Something like that. Even if we didn't, see how that kind of fits in right down over there. But we go in here and we go like that, and we can get both of these things to fit up pretty well onto our mounts. So these will end up working pretty well. We got a nice good front clearance in front of our radiator here in case we want to run crossbars. I know we're going to run at least one, but we might run some other ones or create mounts for like an oil cooler or something like that in here. So that gives us plenty of space to do that. So this bar is good, and kind of based on this, and there's not a whole lot of difference now between this bar and the other bar. Now that we got rid of that second bend and this one bend, that makes both of these bars much more similar, except for the length of basically this bottom bar here. So what we're gonna do now is finish this, but we can't finish this right now. In fact, I don't want to cut any of the edges to their proper length because I'm not exactly sure where that is. You're gonna say, why is that? Well, these mounts I made generally as a really good plan for how to do these mounts, but the actual final version of them is gonna look a little bit different. So let's go hop over to the workbench and I'll show you what that's gonna look like. Okay, so we're at our bench here, and our mount system is gonna be pretty simple. So this is a really basic way to mount it. You take a piece of tube, in this case this is a 1 1/8 inch, what is this, 080 something wall tube, and a piece of stock. In this case this is 088 I think, round stock, and we put them together. So the specific thing, we'll cut this to a certain length and then cut a smaller slug of this piece of round bar and slip that in there. We size these things such that this is somewhere between a slip fit and a transitional fit. So it'll go in relatively easy for us, but then once the pieces are in, they'll essentially function like one piece, and we just have to seal weld the edges here, right back in here, right? So where that connection would be, we seal weld that in order to keep this thing from coming in and out. And then we have a pretty good solid mount in order to get that done. One thing to keep in mind when you're using bar like this is that if you're using hot rolled bar, like what this is, a hot rolled round bar, it comes on the edge with stuff that looks like, I don't know if you can see that in the light, comes with stuff that's called scale, which is essentially just a byproduct of its manufacturing, but it can actually stop you from making your fit up. So this side I worked both by hand. Toss a coin to your witcher, oh valley of plenty. Oh valley of plenty, oh. But that was taking forever. So I actually went in and took a wire brush to this. But if I didn't do that, say like on this side, you'll notice these pieces don't even fit together. Whereas on this side, this one slides in. So a lot of your prep work can make this fit work out well. You got to do a little bit of research, figure out what the ID of this thing is and what the ODs of your slugs are. Get one that matches as close as possible. But that stuff's pretty easy to do if you're ordering material. So that's what we did. So now it's just a matter of cutting these to length. Cutting these to length. and drilling out the centers. So we have all of our pieces prepped here. We've got our 4 mounts. These are our 1 1/8 like 090 wall. I don't remember exactly what these are. 1 1/8 inch tubes. We do have one that's longer. This is for specifically that lower mount over here because that's set in farther than all the rest of them. We need to make that one longer just to make sure we have enough room, and we'll cut everything off once we're done welding to it. So we've got our 3 pieces here cut, and we've ground these surfaces on the ends so that they're relatively smooth and nice so that we can weld to them. And we got our 4 little slugs, and so these things are just gonna come in here and kind of sit like that. In fact, I'll show you how we assemble them using our assembly tools for welding. But you'll notice that some of these holes are not necessarily centered. I just didn't do a very good job of centering them, nor did I have a really good alignment tool. So I just drilled them. To be honest, it's not really going to affect us too much. This is basically going to function like a cam setup. So when this is in here like that, for instance, we're going to be able to rotate it around on the bolt in order to get the best fit up possible. So that's going to end up working out okay for us. But here's our setup, and here's kind of how we set it up. So I went and a while back, I 3D printed these tools, and these are essentially a tool to use in the vise to make sure we have these things sticking out a relatively uniform amount. So we're going to start with one of these, and so essentially you take one of these and put it in the vise, and then you set your tube on top of it, and then you place your slug into the tube. And so what this does actually is it spaces this thing properly out. I wanted about 1/4 inch of stick out for this thing to mount up, which gives it enough room to mount in case we're having some interference issues with the tube, and enough space for us to put a weld around this edge here without putting so much stick out that we're putting weird sorts of forces on all of our pieces. And the idea is we're gonna come in here and tack weld this piece in the jig, right? So we're gonna set this down in and hold it and tack weld it, and then we'll finish the welding off the jig because that'll obviously melt the plastic. But tack welds, we should be okay hitting these, especially with the distance we have off. We should be okay hitting these with tacks at the very least to get us fixed in place. Oh, hello, Joe. Hi, how are you today? Hello. Just want to come down and say hi? We're going to start welding here soon. You can't be around when that happens. You'll stare in the bright lights and go blind. Close. So I skipped ahead a little bit, but we got this thing fit up, and this is always the fiddly part. If you want to get a good fit up and get yourself the best shot at a good weld, you spend a lot of time here at the very end checking everything, fitting it up, going and taking a little bit. So what I did here is I cut the 2 lengths at places that I knew would work by holding up the full piece. And so I prepped this side here with the cope, and then went back and marked out and then cut and coped this. And then I started the process of putting it up, fitting it up, jiggling with it, identifying where I need to like mess with it a little bit taking it back to the bench, messing with it, taking the grinder to it, bringing it back out here, and eventually it got close enough by hand that I put it in these clamps. And these clamps are doing really well, by the way. They hold it tight enough to keep it in position, but they don't hold it so tight that you can't manipulate it. But once you're done manipulating it, they stay in position. So put it back in here, mess with them a little bit, and then took it back to the bench, bring it back out here, mess with it a little bit more, take it back to the bench. It's been a long night, but we have it to where I am happy with the fit up. And one of our mistakes in the previous fabrication section actually came to help us here. So I don't know if you remember, it was probably a long time ago, relatively speaking, when we were drilling the holes for our bottom mounts, that's these big mounts on the bottom, big bolts, we didn't drill them on center. So I had intended to drill them on center, but I didn't. I'm bad at fabrication. I think we've covered this before, which is not amazing for loading. That means you're gonna get some weird jacking and moment issues on the fastener under certain loads. But this fastener is massive, and it's probably not gonna break no matter how we load it. So I'm not too worried about that. But what it does is it lets us actually cam this lower connection. So I was struggling for a good 45 minutes trying to get the connection, trying to get this fit up where I liked it. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, that thing's off center. So I could loosen it up and turn the mount, and that would just cam it around until it got to a much better fit up, which is where I have it right now. So I put the level on it to make sure this is roughly vertical. That doesn't really make much of a difference for the crash portion, but it'll make the crossbar that I think we're gonna run here a lot easier to install. Now let's just throw on the ground clamp, put on our welding protection gear, and tack this thing up. All right. Would you look what we have here? We have something that resembles a crash bar. Well, the main hoop anyway. We want to connect these at some point here. But I did want to show this off because I'm pretty proud of the final fit anyway. The welds are, well, like pretty much everything else I fabricate here. Not amazing, but probably functional. But I wanted to show this off. So the original design, if we go way back, had this coming down at a 20-degree down angle from vertical. So it should show like 20 degrees or 20 degrees. And with all of this stuff and rejiggering and things like that, I wanted to see what it was. And let me throw this up here. Oh, come on, you were just up. I don't know if you can see, there we go. 20.5 degrees. That's not bad. And then I did check. This is about 1 degree off, and I mean, I didn't want to do the math for whatever this one is, but everything is pretty good. And we do have just enough clearance right down in here to run a crossbar to the other crash bars. So I'm pretty happy with this result. But right now it's getting late and I need to go to sleep and wake up and go back to work. So I'm gonna skip forward unless something interesting happens, and hopefully we'll have our second one made and we can see what the final product looks like. Well, would you looky here, we have a main engine crash hoop on the left-hand side. This actually went a lot easier than the right-hand side did because I got this fit up really close, like really close, to the point where the clamps that I had on here, we'll show you some pictures, every single bolt was less than finger tight. And this was all perfectly, fit up was great. So the clamps worked really good, and they work even better when you get your fit up really close, because then this thing pretty much holds itself together and it's just holding the pipes kind of semi in place and letting the end preps on your tubes do all the hard work. So this went well. The welding is better, still not great. But the bike is solidly now attached to these things with these things bolted in. So we now have main engine crash bars. Oh, that's good. So we did it. We actually now have solidly mounted main engine crash bars with good hoops. Honestly, we could probably run it as is and be perfectly safe, hitting some stuff pretty hard. But we're gonna make some additions to help us with mounting and to kind of distribute forces a little bit better as well. So we have a couple more pieces to throw on, but we're gonna do that next time and cut this episode here. I was actually really impressed. Our 3D printed tooling from our clamps to our set pieces for making these mounts all worked really well. We still have some work to do on our welding, but this is functional, if not pretty. So I'm actually pretty confident in this stuff working out just fine. So anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling, cut the episode for today. Like, comment, subscribe, YouTube things, it really helps out. Links down below to some of the tools, 3D printed and otherwise. The top couple links will probably be Thingiverse files, so if you want to print these tools yourself that I used in our episodes today, then check those out, print them out, use them yourself, and let me know how it goes. We're getting closer to the end on this phase of the adventure bike build, so I'm pretty excited to see the final form of this thing. So, thanks for watching. My name's Andrew, and I'll catch you later.